Red and black power armor are very common with both Loyalist and Chaos Space Marines alike, and it's often pretty hard to get looking right, especially if you don't have an airbrush. Especially black power armor often ends up looking kinda bland with only flat black panels with edge highlights, or then it just ends up looking grey if you start building too many layers. I have been trying out different things with my Space Marines and found out a combination of techniques that I think look pretty good. Today I'm showing you my Red Corsair painting scheme and going through the techniques and recipes for painting some interesting looking power armor without an airbrush. Oh, and hi! Welcome to Warp Things. My name is Otso and I don't like to follow recipes exactly. That is when I'm cooking or painting my miniatures. I also encourage you to switch it up a bit or use whatever paints you have found work well, but I'll still go over all the recipes and put a list of the paints in the description if you're interested. This is the outcome using my recipes exactly, but you can also swap around the colors completely and just use some of the techniques to spice up whatever chapter of Space Marines you're doing. One more thing, I was trying out a different camera for this video. It's a 15-year-old Canon that I'm borrowing from my dad, and I think actually the footage at some points looks better than it used to before, but in some places I think I had some of the settings dialed wrong or the menu was a bit out of focus, so sorry about that. Even though the blurry footage at some points, you should still be able to decipher what's going on. I'm still in the very early stages of doing this whole YouTube thing, so please bear with me. Now, with all of that out of the way, let's paint. This is the Red Corsair Raider I'm painting today. I want this guy to look like he's been raiding for a while, so I tossed the instructions right away and chose the bits with the rule of cool. I added a few trinkets here and there and changed up the exhaust ports from the Mark III backpack to some Mark 7s. That's mainly because I messed them up while I was cutting it off the sprue, but these guys use all sorts of armor marks together anyway, so I think it's not too far-fetched. I have left the head separate for easier access when doing edge highlights to the neck guard. The whole mini is also primed black. The red and black power armor are the main selling points of this color scheme, so I'll go more in depth with that and the technique on how to get the results. Out of these two colors, the red takes the most time and is the sloppiest to paint, so I'll start with that. I started by painting 3 or 4 thin layers of Mephiston Red on all the red parts. The coverage on top of black isn't that great, but better to be patient with this and not just slobber on a thick coat to avoid texture. If you have an airbrush, this step could be applied that way. I usually just pretty much pick out randomly what I want to paint red and what I want to leave black, but this guy has been around for a while, and as a nod to the old Red Corsair color scheme, I leave his thighs and feet black. His chest plate seems to be from a Mark III power armor too, and it has an added plate in front for better protection from oncoming fire. To add to his modified look, I want the plate on top to be a different color, like the old one was ruined and it had to be replaced hastily. So I chose to leave the top plate black, and the torso underneath with the neck guard will be painted red. After I have an even coat of red everywhere, I use a moist makeup sponge to dab some Evil Sunz Scarlet on the upwards facing parts. This doesn't have to cover in one coat, and it doesn't have to be a super smooth transition either for the effect we're going for. Now the red is looking very bright, and I want to bring it down. To do that, I mix Flesh Tearer's red contrast paint with equal parts Lahmian medium. I have struggled with getting even coverage with contrast paints before, but recently I watched War Hipster's video on how to use them correctly. In that video, he compared contrast paints to a text highlighting marker and showed the correct way to apply them, and it helped a lot. Basically, you want to cover just one part at a time, going over everything once calmly. And then, don't touch it at all until it's completely dry. If you go over it again, or mess with it after it's applied, you will get some pooling and tile marks. I go over everything with a thin mix once, then I let it dry completely, and then I do another pass. This is so that if I mess something up applying the contrast paint, it's not as visible as a fully saturated paint. But if you are confident with them, you can just use one unthin coat. Next up are the fake edge highlights beside all the armor trim you see on heavy metal paint jobs. These are completely optional of course, but the Red Corsairs don't have a lot of trim, so I like to do these, and I think it really adds to the overall look. These tend to be very hard to do. Usually it's basically freehanding a thin even line beside all the trim, but I found out an easier method while trying things out that takes half of the struggle away. Take a decent amount of Evil Sunz Scarlet on your brush, thin it a bit so it doesn't leave texture behind, but so that it still covers in one go. Place your brush in the seam where the armor meets the trim and drag towards you, leaving a big fat line behind. The only thing you gotta focus on at this point is getting the armor side of the line as even as possible. Just drag the brush back using the seam as guidance. If the line is not even enough, you can just do another pass and solidify it. If you want the effect even brighter, as I do on all the upwards facing lines, take an even brighter red and repeat this first step. I use Angelic Red from the Army Painter Fanatic range. I think Wild Rider Red would be pretty close if you're using Citadel. Now we gotta clean it up. Take some Abaddon Black and thin it down with water until you get a nice flowing consistency. Get your brush to a nice tip or use a thinner brush this time. Place the brush in the seam again and pull back. This time painting more with the tip of the brush for a thinner line and pressing towards the trim. Again, you can reinforce this with more thin black for a more intense effect or to fix any mistakes. I think, especially when painting Space Marines, blacklining all the armor parts and whenever any material meets another is a solid way to make the whole model look more readable. I use a sharp paintbrush and the same watered down Abaddon Black to draw in all the black lines. I don't like to use washes to do these. They can dry somewhat glossy and leave tide marks behind if I make a mistake. Abaddon Black is also a fairly weak black paint, so it rarely leaves any crazy dark splotches outside of the gaps, and if you are quick enough, you can just wipe it away from the raised area with your finger or a clean damp brush. Don't worry if you accidentally paint some black a bit outside of the lines. The edge highlighting we're gonna do next will fix that. I hit all of the edges with highlights of Evil Sunz Scarlet. I use the side of the brush whenever possible and try to do some clean lines with the tip of the brush whenever I have to. I glaze a bit of Evil Sunz Scarlet on top of the neck guard to brighten it up even more, and then paint the edges again with some Angelic Red. This is 10 times easier to do when the head is separate. I go over all the other upwards facing edges with Angelic Red too. This is kind of crucial if you want to get the volumetric highlights we're about to do next. If you got your edge highlights looking good and don't feel like working on the reds anymore, you can leave them like this and do the next steps only on your characters. But I want to add some spice to all of my raiders too. This next phase is what ties everything in the reds together and fixes up any mistakes. It also builds on top, but removes the glossiness of the contrast paint we used at the start, that always annoys me. I'm going to add some volumetric highlights and paint and texture all at the same time by glazing over everything with the colors we've used so far. Abaddon Black, Mephiston Red and some Evil Sunz Scarlet. I do this one armor plate at a time, so it's not too overwhelming, but I'll try to explain it as coherently as I can. I start by glazing the upward and forward facing parts, heavily with Mephiston Red. I want the main viewing angle to look well lit. I glaze an uneven splotchy and scratchy highlight of Evil Sunz Scarlet in the middle of the Mephiston Red to bring the brightest parts up a notch. It's important to be selective with this and not go overboard. I intentionally do it pretty hastily and let the scratches build up texture. Then I thin the Angelic Red to a very thin glaze consistency and draw some thin lines, scratches, crosses and dots into the brightest highlights to really sell the well-worn armor effect. This will show a lot better on camera on the black parts, so let's focus on that later. With the brightest points on the reds established, I start adding some contrasting darker paints. These will start from the Mephiston Red parts and get darker the lower they go. To do these, I mix Mephiston Red with Abaddon Black, about half and half. I start the brush strokes from the already painted area, so that it smoothens out the transition, and then I pull downwards or outwards depending on the shape. The direction of the brush stroke when glazing is pretty important, because the brush always leaves some more paint towards the end of the brush stroke and where you lift it off. As I said, I do this one panel at a time, and it's not really one and done. I usually go a bit back and forth with the reds to get the look that I want. It works well just to keep in mind where your light is coming from and how light reacts with different shapes. In short, long cylindrical things like arms, legs and the top of the backpack get a long tube-like highlight. Round things like heads, shoulder pads get a round highlight. But it's really not that deep, and whatever looks good on the miniature at hand is the way to go. Someone might think glazing like this takes super long to do, but I consider myself a pretty slow painter and I can crank out all of the red parts in one session of painting if I focus. This method is very feeling based and painterly, but I think it's very relaxing to do. Just put on a good audiobook or lower video and start pushing some paint around. You could also batch paint like this if you want, that could really speed up the army painting, or just leave all the fancy stuff for the characters. Anyway, finally for the reds, I do some last bright edge highlights only on the most topward and sharp edges with a mix of angelic red and ice yellow. The places where I would place these highlights are on the head if it was red, on the backpack, the upwards facing fake edge highlights on the shoulder pads, and hands. Anything you want to draw the eye to. The reds are by far the most time-consuming part of this paint job, and getting that done pretty much marks the halfway point of the whole thing. But I really need to be careful now that I don't hit the parts again with some other paints. But if I got to patch the reds up a bit, it's not the end of the world. It just adds to the whole dinged up look of these renegades. Between the red and black armors, I base coated everything that will be golden, leather, fur, bone, fabric, and so on, with Rhinox Hide, just so I get more familiar with the model and don't forget to paint anything. It's also way easier to cover those sorts of colors over brown than black. After that, I quickly finished up all the leather parts by highlighting them with Mournfang Brown, and then I added a thin glaze of Abaddon Black on the flat areas for more depth. Onto the black armor. Well, it's already black, but we gotta make it pop. I'm actually using only 3 paints to get the results I want, and it's a lot faster to do than the red. We can pretty much skip half of the steps at the start and get straight into the edges and highlights. I'm using deep gray from the army painter to first edge highlight all of the edges on the black armor. Again, try to use the edge of your brush whenever you can, and doing the fake edge highlights can be done like I did with the red. Highlighting black is very forgiving compared to the red. If I mess something up, I can just go back with Abaddon Black to patch it up, since there's no blending of different colors involved. Once I got the first round of grey highlights done, I put the mini on its base. I've made a few of these bases beforehand, and they are a slight variation in color of the bases I did on my first video on this channel. Now with everything glued in place, I can see the whole picture better. I use ash grey from the army painter to do a second round of edge highlights. I try to make these edges as clean as I can and fix up any mistakes with black. Okay, now onto the texture I've been talking so much about. The armor should read a bit reflective but still painted black. To get this result, we want bright edges and some pretty small volumetric highlights so that there is a hint of what the armor texture is like, but the majority is still black. I thin deep grey with water to a glaze consistency. You can see the opacity on my nail here. This is the same what I did with the last few steps when doing the reds, but I decided to fully record doing the helmet and the chest plate so that I can explain my point across better. I start mapping the highlights roughly with a stippling motion, not caring too much about the coverage at this point. I'm mostly focusing on the shape of the highlights. Then I take out the ash grey I used for the brighter edges, again very thinned, and do a similar pass of stippling but keeping inside the previous grey and keeping the area smaller. Then I thin it a bit more until it barely leaves anything behind and start painting some thin scratches. I try to keep these as thin as possible and do them in different directions, but always so that the other end of the scratch is in the highlighted area. These won't have to show clearly, but they all add to the effect. Finally, I thin Abaddon Black and glaze over the whole effect. Again, as with the red, I pull the glaze outward towards the black so that less pigment is left on the lighter part. Try to stay clear of the edge highlights with the black glaze, or just do them again later. I did a bit of both. I could leave it like it is now, but I decided to intensify the effect by adding more scratches with the lighter grey and then another glaze of the black. The whole idea with this is to show the wear and tear of the armor on a few main areas that imply the armor is rough and scratched up, and letting the imagination fill out the rest. At least I think that's what I'm going for here. You can really do this as many times as you like, or as little as you want. You can also swap the greys with another color, like Incubi Darkness for example, for a dark green-blue tint. Or then you could just do the stippling without the scratches for a more forged metal look. The armor is now done, and there's only a few details left to do. Let's pick up the pace a bit and start with the eyes. The Red Corsairs have blue eye lenses. I want to add a small glow effect to contrast with the dark colored head. I go over the whole lens with Phalanx Blue from the Army Painter, trying to avoid the recesses under the lens. If any paint gets there, a quick black line does the trick. I also paint this same blue as an edge highlight under the eye lenses. After that, a blue shade over just the lenses. I'm using Tyrant Blue. And after the shade is dry, I go over only the raised middle area of the lens with Baharroth Blue. And because it's important that the lens is brighter than the light that it casts onto the edge, I do another even smaller pass of 2 parts white to 1 part Baharroth Blue, only in the middle of each lens. Quick and pretty effective. I did the cloth and the bones pretty quickly and at the same time. I always vary how I do these. This time I base coated the cloth with Steel Legion Drab and the skulls with Morghast Bone, but for both I left the Rhinox Hide peeking from all the recesses. Then I used the Morghast Bone to paint highlights to the cloth and pale sand from the Army Painter to highlight the bones. And then just a quick wash of thinned Agrax Earthshade over both the cloth and the bones. I quickly went back and brightened up the most prominent highlights with the same highlight colors I had on the palette. I noticed I had forgot to paint the fist symbol on the shoulder pad completely. It got the same edge highlights as the black armor, dark grey all around, and then a lighter one from above. Oh, and I painted the armor soft joints and tubes with deep grey and then used black Templar contrast paint to darken them. I'm not sure where the footage went when I was painting them, but I thought I'd mention it here. The only things left to do are the metallics. I always do my metallics pretty simply. I'll start with the golds, cause there's way less of them. I got a suggestion from a comment about doing a sort of bronzy desaturated gold with a 50-50 mix of silver and gold. I tried it out and I really liked it, so thanks for the tip. I mixed Arcane Gold with Obsidian Black base paints from the Vallejo True Metallic series. I really like Vallejo metallics. Compared to my crusty old pots of Lead Belcher and Retributor armor, the mix and the coverage is a lot smoother, but the colors are pretty similar. I did 2 thinned coats of this mix all over the gold bits. So that's the backpack exhaust ports, belt buckle, bolts on the ammo feed, and I also picked out some trim on the armor to be gold too. In this case, his right wrist and thigh trims. After that, an all over wash of Ratling flesh shade to bring down the overall shine and tint the color more towards copper. Then, to give it a hint of some slight verdigris, I painted some Bealtan green mixed with Tyrant blue, both shade paints, just around the bolts and in some deep recesses. I kept off the top edges with the washes so that I didn't have to highlight them again. The last thing to do before the whole model is finished is to paint the black metallic trim and the other steel bits. Let's start with the latter since there's nothing special to it. As a base coat for the metallic parts like the gun, chainsword, bonding studs and details on the helmet and backpack, I use gunmetal from Vallejo. After 2 thin coats of that, I went over the bolt pistol casing with some Ratling Grime contrast paint, cause I saw GW do it and I thought it looked pretty good. Then an unthinned wash of Nuln Oil all over and some quick highlights of Vallejo Obsidian Black light this time, again from the True Metallics range. The final thing left to paint is the black metal trim. I have 2 ways I've done it before. The first and easier way, like shown here on this mini, was just done by edge highlighting with Lead Belcher over black and then washing it with Nuln Oil. I think the result is pretty close from the second one, so that's a great way to save some time. I like to do lots of unnecessary work with little payout though, so here's how I did it this time. I start by going all over the trim with Enchanted Steel. It's an Army Painter speed paint metallic that's really dark and covers pretty easily. Over black it only shows as a dark bluish sheen, but that's what I'm going for here. Then I used the same Obsidian Black light that I used to highlight all the previous metals and did an edge highlight all over the trim. Edge highlighting with the metals is pretty scary. I don't want any shiny mishaps on the finished armor, so I take my time with it. I make sure to highlight all of the bolts and rivets on the trim and all around the model too. After the edge highlights are done, I take Abaddon Black and Rhinox Hide out for the last time and thin them down with a lot of water. I paint the black between the edge highlights on the trim, cleaning up any uneven lines and darkening the trim at the same time. In some places, like around some rivets, I do it with Rhinox Hide instead, for a quick and dirty rust effect. Finally, for the trim is an all-over wash with Nuln Oil. It blends all the finishes together and brings down the brightness of the edges just a bit so that they don't steal the spotlight from everything else. And after painting the base rim black, a quick spray of varnish and then some pigment powder on the base to match the board from my last video, this Red Corsair Raider is done and ready to join my slowly growing ranks of space pirates. I really like the new Red Corsairs range. I think they have the perfect amount of detail on them so that they're not too busy, but they are still interesting. And I think the whole kit of the Red Corsair Raiders is perfect for kit bashing. I also really like how the paint scheme came out, and now I have a video to reference if I ever forget something. I know the scheme is a bit complicated at parts, but I really want my raiders to look as good as they can while I can still finish them in a timely fashion. I really hope that you enjoyed the video or found something useful in the recipes or techniques. If you have any questions or feedback, please leave a comment down below. And if you try this scheme out, I would really want to see how it turned out. I turned on the setting on my YouTube channel that allows subscribers to post pictures and posts on my YouTube community page, and I'd really love to get a small community going and see your work there. If you like the content I make and want to see more, I'd really appreciate the subscription. And thank you for all over 600 people of you who have already done so. I'm working on some more Red Corsairs content with some kit bashing involved, so stay tuned. And who knows what else hobby related I'll post after that. Right now I'm doing my videos whenever I have the time to, and doing them about the things that excite me. The reception for the board video I did last time was really nice, and I want to do some other terrain builds as well in the near future. It's really motivating to see that someone likes the stuff I do as a hobby, and it really gets me excited about working on my silly videos and learning new things as I go. Anyway, that's enough from me for this time. Thank you so much for watching, and I hope to see you next time. Bye bye.